If, like me, you found yourself picking up one of these, a Forward to Berlin box set by Warlord Games, you might find yourself in a bit of a situation, because there are 54 infantry minis, not including dogs, or tanks, or vehicles, in this box set. This isn't my first time painting Soviet minis, so I've learned a few tips and tricks along the way, a lot of which I will be showing you in this upcoming tutorial. I'll be covering everything from basic line infantry to NKVD officers. It's also a pretty fast way of doing things. This took me a week, with just an hour or two after work every single day. It was probably about 14 to 15 hours in total. I have a separate video coming soon about how we paint the armour inside this box. But until then, welcome to the Gulag, comrade. Let's get started. Before we prime our minis, I'm going to get the basing sorted first, as this will make it easier for me further down the line. If you don't want to know about the basing, skip to this time mark as shown on screen. But for now, I'm just using a watered down PVA glue and applying it onto the bases of the minis. After giving it a few minutes to set, I'm dipping it in a pre-made instant base scatter. The one I'm using today is from Rival Crafts, not sponsored, I just think it's pretty good. You can let this set overnight or get a hairdryer on them. I always do this process the night before I know I'm going to start painting. If you get any PVA on the minis, just wipe it off. Same thing with the bases, just give it a wipe off before it dries. Once the basing is set, I'm priming all these minis in Death Guard green, but I'll be priming any character models in a Xenophil highlight. If you don't know what that is just a black undercoat and then a top-down spray of white or bone colour. We'll be doing this as well for the heads of the infantry, as well as any characters or vehicles. This is purely for speed purposes. If you'd rather just prime your heads and or vehicles in the Death Guard green or any similar green, then go ahead. I'm going to be using Streak and Grime just to darken that base coat. Can use Agrex Earthshade, but I'm not a big fan of the satin finish it leaves. We're going to really brighten these colours back up. This is purely just for recess shading. If you're going ahead with the Streak and Grime and you've never used it before, just put a good coat on, wear some gloves and put some paper towels down. Streak and Grime stays active for a very long time, so don't be worried about ruining your minis. We're going to end up washing most of it off anyway. We're going to drench the minis in odorless thinner, and then use a cotton bud to just soak up all that grime and all that thinner. If you'd rather have dirtier minis than what I have, then you can leave as much or as little grime on your minis as possible. I'm purely using it just to darken that base coat. If you decide to do your vehicles in the same colour as the infantry, then you can do this process as well. With vehicles like this, I like to leave as much grime in the recesses as possible. Much like the PVA, we're going to leave this to dry overnight or use a hairdryer or similar tool to just evaporate all the thinner. The first paint we're going to be using today is Vallejo's 988 khaki. We're just going to be painting it over any raised areas. We can be quite liberal with this. The only thing we're avoiding is the recesses. It may look messy when you start doing it, but trust me, step away from the mini and you'll notice the difference. It has a pretty nice effect as it is, but we're going to be going over it one more time with Nurgling Green. The difference this time is we're only going over any raised areas or creases in the clothing. You can also hit any shoulder tabs or collars while doing this. Again, it looks messy when you're doing it, but step away, let it dry, and it looks pretty cool. If you batch paint an entire army like me, it can be pretty daunting, pretty tiring to be honest, but it's always worth it at the end when you realise you don't have to crank out another 40 minis because you've only done 10. Another thing that can help with army painting is references, lots of references. Warlord Games do these armies of books, there's a lot of references in these, but the cheaper option is to always just use Google. So now the base uniform's done, we're going to be painting in the boots. Any black is fine. You can use a bigger brush when doing this, just be a bit careful not to get on the green. Whilst we also have the black out, it would be a good idea to do any belts. The Soviets used boot polish to blacken their boots and blacken their belts. So if, like me, you decided to leave the heads off your minis, I'll be going over how we did that. Over a Xenophil highlight, we used Army Painter's Crusader skin, and then we're highlighting with Flayed One Flesh from Citadel, hitting all the cheeks, all the noses and all the chins. We're leaving the recesses because I'm not painting 54 pairs of eyes. It's also a good way to get a lot of heads done in a very fast time. For the helmets, we're using 894 Camo Olive Green from Vallejo. We're also going to be using this on any capes. Because of the Xenophil, we might need a few thin coats. But while the helmets are drying, we're going to go over those capes. There's always something to do when you're army painting. Once that's dry, we're going to give a dry brush of 890 Refractive Green. You can also do this on the capes, but I much prefer khaki on the capes. I'll show you the difference now. So before we attach the heads to the bodies, we're going to be painting in the chin straps with grey-green. A lot of the colours I'm using today are from Vallejo's World War II paint set, Soviet Armour and Infantry. It's a pretty handy set for any Soviet army project, so I'd recommend getting it. Next thing to do is to attach those heads. You can use super glue or plastic glue. Just make sure you're holding those heads tightly, don't let them roll. Once the heads are attached, it's time to paint in the hands. We're going to be using the same paint we used to highlight the faces, and then we're going to be going over the top with a flesh tone from the Army Painter, Flesh Wash. Again, making sure to get in those recesses. We're going to be going over the top again with the highlight colour, which for me is Flayed One Flesh. Make sure you're using a brush with a nice tip, because we're going to need a very thin point. Again, just going over any raised areas, leaving the wash in the recesses. Some people find painting flesh quite tedious. I really find it enjoying. It always looks nice when you finally get those finishing touches on. So once all the skin's sorted, we're going to be going over with 886 grey-green on all the webbing. That includes weapon straps as well. If you don't know what you're going for, just watch the video and see what I'm hitting. Or use our old friend Google. These areas can be a bit tricky, so if you mess up like I do in a second, right there, just put a bit of water on your brush, drop it on, and then soak it all back up, and then go over it again. So now with most of the uniforms sorted, we're going to be moving on to the weapons. So we're pretty much sorted with the uniforms now, unless you've got any medals to paint in, but we'll get to that. So now we're going to paint the weapons. My reference for today is my own PPSH 41. It's dated 1944, so you can't get more historically accurate than this. So some things you might have noticed is that the magazine is a darker metal compared to the rest of the weapon. So I'll be using lead belcher for the weapon, and a Iron Warriors mixed with black for the magazine, as well as a dark rifle stock. So there's a few ways we can paint these stocks. The first two examples are going to be base coated in Doomball Brown, and the other will be in Baneblade Brown. The first Doomball Brown example, we're just going to get a nice tip of the brush and we're going to just do some thin lines in Wraithbone. We'll also be painting in the metal parts and giving it all a flesh wash. Once the wash is dried, go over with some thin lines of black. The second method is to just sketch in some Xandri dust over the top of the Doomball Brown. We're leaving that dark recess in, just going over the top, leaving some of that brown showing through. For the final bit of detail, we're just going to do some thin lines of black. Moving on from that mistake, we're going to be doing the third and final method, which is thin Wraithbone lines over a coat of Baneblade Brown. And all washed over with Seraphim Sepia. Once it's all dried, go over it again with some thin black lines. So if you didn't use the flesh wash over the metallics, it's time to do so with some normal wear. We're letting this pool in the recesses, but not on the open sheet metal. Add a few final details to do, so if you've got any infantry with hats, little caps, just give it a coat of that base khaki. And once that's done, we're going to be going over with a thin edge highlight of Nurgling Green. Once all the caps are painted, it's time to do the hair. I'm using Imperial Fist for the blondes and Black Templar for everyone else. If the yellow is too bright for you, you can go over with a Seraphim Sepia wash. There's also a couple of Ushankas to do the fur on them. We're going to be using medium sea grey, and then we're going to do a little sketch highlight of AK's Ivory. To do the blues on the NKVD, we're going to be using dark Prussian blue as the base coat. This is for trousers, hats, and also if you've got a few tankers, we can do them at the same time. The next step is AK's light Prussian blue, and we're just going to be doing the same thing we did with the khaki, going over those raised areas. Feel free to do this on the hats as well, wherever you deem appropriate. For the final blue stage, we're going to be using Vallejo's Model Air UK Azure. Again, like we did with the Nurgling Green, just going over those raised areas. You can be fast or slow at this stage, but if you take your time you can really make that blue pop. I messed up the recording here, but we're going to be using Evil Sun Scarlet just for this centre bit of the NKVD cap. We'll also be doing this for the rest of the officers. Once that's in, use black or black Templar to just paint over the rim of the cap. We will cover the painted bases, don't worry, I just got a bit excited with these minis. So let's get the rest of the metallics out of the way. First we'll be painting the bullets on the MMGs. I'm using Abaddon Black and Skullcrusher Brass. Black for the tips and brass for the backs. Once that's all in, we're going to be using Retributor Armour just to paint over any of the little stars on the officer caps or any watches that any of the Soviet infantry have. There's a fair few of those included in the set, so keep your eyes open. So the final step to do is the basing. We're going to be using a very watered down worn Fang Brown. You can pretty much see how watered down it is here. Once that's dry, we're going to give it a dry brush with Wraithbone. If you've watched my previous infantry painting challenge, then you'll know what I'm doing here. It's pretty much the same. I wanted it to be an identical base for the armies. You may find yourself hitting the boots when doing this method. You can either leave it and use it as a dust effect, or just quickly wipe it off. It's up to you. I personally found myself dry brushing the capes as well. For the final stage of the basing, we're going to be using Corex White. And we're just going to be hitting any raised areas, just a very light dry brush. If you do too much, it can be quite overpowering. But play around with it and see how you like it. And that's all the infantry painted. I've missed out a few details here, like the NKVD shoulder tabs or just any high ranking marks, but it wasn't that much of a big deal for me. I'm happy with the look and I know who's who, and I think everyone else will pretty much know who's who as well. I could probably get more of these painting videos out if I didn't have to paint an entire army every time I did a video, but it's good inspiration to get it all done. My next video will be covering Soviet armour, specifically a T-34 and an ISU. Both will be shown on screen. I'll also be working on a Conflict 47 painting guide. I'm really looking forward to that one. As well as probably the new Custodies whenever they're out. But until then, I've been the Bloody Mama, you've been wonderful, stay safe.